Hello everybody and welcome to Ultimate Sporting News. I'm Andrew Tanner and I'm doing a recap for weeks 2 and 3 of the CFL season. Start with week 2. The Calgary Stampeders defeated the Toronto Argonauts 41-7. Bo Levi Mitchell was 20 for 22, threw for 324 yards, and threw for 3 touchdowns. He had no interceptions. Don Jackson ran for 123 yards on 9 carries. Terry Williams ran for 70 yards on 12 carries, and Eric Rogers had 5 receptions for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Hamilton Tiger Cats defeated the Edmonton Eskimos 38-21. Jeremiah Masoli was 19 for 29, threw for 332 yards and threw 3 touchdowns and had 1 interception. And Zoli also ran for 59 yards on 7 carries. Had a good game for him. Mercer Timmis ran for 133 yards on 17 carries and ran for 2 touchdowns. Brandon Banks had 7 receptions for 117 yards and 1 touchdown. Luke Tasker had 5 receptions for 103 yards and had 2 touchdowns. The Saskatchewan Roughriders lost to the Ottawa Redblacks 40-17. Trevor Harris was 26 for 36, threw for 345 yards, threw for 2 touchdowns and had 1 interception. William Powell ran for 94 yards on 19 carries and had 1 touchdown. Greg Ellingson had 8 receptions for 104 yards. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers defeated the Montreal Alouettes 56-10. Chris Streveler was 22 for 28 and threw for 246 passing yards, threw 3 touchdowns and had no interceptions. He also ran for 98 yards on 10 carries and had 1 rushing touchdown. Andrew Harris had 6 receptions for 68 yards and had 1 touchdown. Thoughts for week 2. There's a lot of blowouts in week 2. There was a couple things that stood out for me. Bo Levi Mitchell was nearly perfect. Another thing that stood out for me is Jeremiah Masoli. He's doing it in the air and on the ground, almost 400 yards combined between passing yards and rushing yards. What a big week for Jeremiah Masoli. Now to week 3. The BC Lions lost to the Edmonton Eskimos 41-22. Mike Riley was 22 for 30, threw for 326 yards, threw for 3 touchdowns, and threw 2 interceptions. CJ Gable had 23 carries for 165 rushing yards and had 1 rushing touchdown. Daquille Williams had 6 receptions for 129 yards and had 1 reception for a touchdown. The Montreal Alouettes defeated the Saskatchewan Roughriders 23-17. Drew Riley was 8 for 15 and threw for 157 yards and threw one touchdown. He left the game early. Quist Williams had 3 receptions for 130 yards. He had a 79-yard touchdown. The Ottawa Redblacks lost to the Calgary Stampeders 24-14. Bo Levi Mitchell was 19 for 35, 3 for 251 passing yards, threw for 2 touchdowns and had 1 interception. William Powell had 13 carries for 123 yards. Don Jackson had 15 carries for 84 yards and ran for a touchdown. Greg Ellingson had 6 receptions for 97 yards and had 1 touchdown. Devarius Daniels had 5 receptions for 91 yards. The Hamilton Tiger Cats defeated the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 31-17. Jeremiah Mazzoli was 31 for 41, threw for 369 yards, threw 1 touchdown and had 1 interception. Sean Thomas Erlingston had 11 carries for 92 yards. Chris Straveller had 17 for 30, threw for 156 yards. On the ground, Straveller ran the ball 5 times for 55 yards and ran for 1 touchdown. Brandon Banks had 11 receptions for 111 yards. I was impressed with Montreal's defense. They had 4 interceptions. Another team who seems to be rolling is Calgary, as they remain undefeated at 3-0. Week 4's schedule looks like this. Hamilton Tiger Cats will be playing the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The Ottawa Redblacks will be playing the Montreal Alouettes. The Edmonton Eskimos will be playing the Toronto Argonauts. And the BC Lions will be playing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Tune in next week for a recap of Week 4 and a schedule for Week 5.